Hi, I'm Terrence Kommal. I'm in the esteemed presence and have the great pleasure of spending some time with Professor Prof Khanna of the Harvard Business School at Harvard University. Professor, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Terrence.
Great. It's been an honor, sharing some time with you and your masterclass here in Johannesburg. If you could maybe, with sight of the developing world, particularly in my view of Africa as a context, something you had mentioned to us earlier to the discussions is creating conditions for yourself as opposed to the current barriers in that space. Would you care to share some thoughts on that?
Thank you, Terrence. As we know from our discussions the last couple of days with the YPO colleagues, I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship and what I would refer to as individual agency. In other words, taking responsibility for the problems around you and doing something creative about them through ventures of different sorts. They might be for-profit, they might be not-for-profit, they might occur in the private sector, they might even be in the public sector, even though people in the developing world tend not to think of the public sector as being particularly entrepreneurial.
Yes.
That's something we might come back to. But I think across most of the efforts, both those that I've studied as an academic and also my own ventures that I've created in different countries, I have come to realize that the entrepreneur has, if you will, a heavier burden in the developing world, which is why it's developing and not developed, is that it's trickier to get things done.
Correct.
I think actually the most efficient, most expedient, perhaps even most beneficial for society approach is to do what I refer to in my new book, Trust, to create the conditions to create. In other words, it's insufficient for you as an entrepreneur to say that I'm simply going to create whatever it is. In your case, it might be medical services of different sorts.
Yes.
But you also have to pay attention to the enabling conditions that in my adopted home of Boston I might find readily available to me around me. Might be plentiful risk capital, might be uncorrupted information, might be stable regulatory regimes that change but with predictability, and so on and so forth. But in our parts of the world, in my home country of India, for instance, even in most parts of China, certainly across Africa, the Middle East, it's harder to assume that these factors exist. So then one is faced with the realization that we can either do something about it or resort to the tried and true lament of most of our compatriots, which is to say it's the government's fault or it's the outsider's fault. And I find that a dispiriting attitude, but also frankly not very useful, because government policies will change slowly. And I sort of feel like it's incumbent upon us as people who have the benefit of a good education and some privilege to be able to step out and say, let us take responsibility for creating these conditions to create. And there are plenty of examples of these.
Yes.